Hello, everyone. We're ready to get started. I want to thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. My name is Adam Ingberman, and I'm the Vice President of Product and Marketing for the Economist GMAT Tutor. The GMAT Tutor is an online GMAT prep course that hones in on a student's strengths and weaknesses, adapting to their individual skill set to prepare them for the GMAT. At the heart of the Economist GMAT Tutor prep course is a commitment to the success of our students. Our goal is not just GMAT success, but GMAT success that leads to a successful application and admission at a desired program. That's our goal. And that's what brings us here today. Jake is our senior instructor at the Economist GMAT Tutor, and he's going to provide strategies to achieving your very best GMAT score. We also have Karen Altman, who is an MBA admissions consultant at Stacy Blackman Consulting. Karen is going to explain how your GMAT score is viewed by schools during the application process and how to approach the entire application process should your score not be quite as high as you think it should be. We're going to have time at the end for Karen and Jake to answer some questions, which you can submit during or after their presentations. I'm now handing off to Jake to kick off today's webinar.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for that introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I guess we have a global audience attending today, and thank you so much for everyone's time. So yes, my name is Jake Wengroff, and I am a senior instructor with the Economist GMAT Tutor. I have been teaching the GMAT for 11 years total, so I have quite a lot of insights into this exam and also a lot of things to say, but we only have 45 minutes today, and I do have a co-presenter, so I won't chew everyone's ear off. But so today we're talking about low GMAT scores, mission tips, and study strategies, and perhaps that might seem a little ironic that why would we have a webinar about a low GMAT score from a an organization where we're trying to get you the highest GMAT score. So maybe that might seem a little counterintuitive, but I think it's still uh, worth our time if we explore what should be some study habits or what you should do to try to get your highest GMAT score, even when you think you might not get your highest GMAT score. So we will proceed. Oh, here, some bios on us. Okay. Um, I think that probably first and foremost, I think that for anyone who is planning on applying to business school and anyone who's planning on taking the GMAT, that they create a study plan, whether that study plan lasts for a whole year, whether that study plan is for 6 months, whether that study plan is only for 1 month. Okay, I think it's important that people create a study plan and stick with it. It's probably safe to say most people on this call can probably agree with the fact that the GMAT's probably harder than you first thought, right? I think that when a lot of people wake up one day and they finally realize, you know what, I think I'm going to get an MBA. I think that's what my next step in my personal and professional uh, career should be, right? And you realize the requirements and what you need to apply to business school, and you stumble upon this thing called the GMAT and the requirements that you have to take the GMAT. And a lot of people at first glance probably don't realize just how difficult the exam is. Okay, I know that we live in a world of Snapchat and Instagram, and as everyone likes to say, those millennials, everything just comes so easy. But the GMAT doesn't come as easy as you think it does. And no matter how much time you have for the GMAT, I think it's important that you do create a plan and you stick with it, and that you create a very focused and disciplined approach to studying as much as you can with the time that you have available to yourself. Again, the longer you have, the better off you will, or at least it's safe to say that the most success you will have, the more time that you have committed to studying for the exam. But even with a short time frame, you can still make dramatic improvements. Okay, so here we are on the next slide, which is another strategy. And perhaps this may seem a little obvious to some people, may not be to others, but you want to take exams. You want to take practice exams. When I said a few minutes ago that you want to study as much as you can in the time that you have given yourself, well, study, of course, also includes taking practice exams because you want to gauge your success. You want to anticipate what might happen on real life test day. Just studying and going over practice questions and reviewing tutorials, that only goes so far. You want to put yourself into a timed environment. You want to see if you can recreate what might happen on test day. That is why you want to take and review practice exams. Notice that I'm saying review practice exams, and we've italicized that word for emphasis. I think that what a lot of people don't recognize is they don't realize the importance of actually reviewing an exam. They will take a practice exam, they'll say, "Oh, wow, I got a 700. Okay, cool." Thinking, "Wow, that's in the neighborhood of their dream score," and then put it off to the side, and then will perhaps continue studying and plan to take another practice exam. But I think it's very, very important. It's something that people really overlook is the reviewing of a practice exam. And I'm not just saying opening up the results, going over the questions that you got incorrect, seeing what the correct answer is and how to do it, but actually going over every single question. I think that's important as well. You may have gotten a question correct because you guessed, or because you thought you knew how to do it one way, or maybe used a certain set of numbers or testing scenarios when it turns out there may have been a more optimal set of numbers or strategies that you should have used. So I think that reviewing practice exams is extremely, extremely important. So obviously, to take an exam, it's a few hours, but for reviewing a practice exam, you should also put aside at least an hour, whether it's right after you took the exam, later on that day, or the next day while that test or practice test experience is still fresh in your mind. I cannot emphasize that enough. Moving right along, GMAT test strategy three. We take the GMAT. Many of you might are, or many of you on this call might be aware of the rules that have changed last summer. And now you can, on test day, you will actually see your score before you are asked if you want to report it or cancel it. And if you choose to cancel it, it turns out that the schools do not see the word cancel or the letter C on your official transcript. It's just a practice exam. It's just private information between you and the Graduate Mentoring Admissions Council. So that is a huge, or can be a benefit or advantage. Okay. And as most of you also might know, that you only need to, or if you need to retest, you do not have to wait 31 days anymore. You only have to wait 16 days to take the GMAT again. So clearly, this change in administration creates a huge advantage for some students who are trying to beat the clock, trying to beat an admissions deadline.
We sure can. All right. It looks like we're getting a little bit that some people can't see the slides. Just want to make sure everyone can see the slides. Okay. So moving on is how do you handle if you did get a lower GMAT score or lower than average GMAT score in your applications? And there are people who get it, right? There's an average for a reason. So, from my perspective, both as a prior admissions officer at Kellogg and now having worked on the other side in admissions consulting for many years, I strongly feel you should always try to take the GMAT at least once if you don't get your best score. AdCom, not only do they want to make sure that you score well, but they want to make sure that you're self aware enough and that you've tried your best. If you've only taken it once and you've gotten a below average score for the school that you're interested in or schools, you don't really get at that trying piece. AdCom does not look down upon multiple efforts. In fact, if you've only taken it once, they're going to wonder why if you really want your MBA, like why haven't you really given it your all? Now, taking it 10 times is probably an issue, but certainly two, three times is not an issue at all, and AdCom expects it. And then in terms of what they look at, they certainly look at the overall score, and that's what we usually talk about a lot. But they also look very, very closely at that quantitative score as well, because the quantitative score is what really tells them if you're going to be able to handle the curriculum or not. So, for an example, a 700 GMAT with a 70% quant reads very, very differently than a 700 GMAT with a 50% quant. And AdCom is going to look at that differently. So the quant, you want to focus certainly on the overall score as well as what that quantitative score is. So moving on, if you've taken the GMAT several times, you've gotten your score, you're fine with it, you don't love it, but you think that that's the best that you can do. You need to move on and really move on to all the other pieces in the application, which are quite time intensive for those of you who have been through it. So once you've exhausted the GMAT, you'll need to demonstrate your intellectual abilities in a variety of ways. So from an academic standpoint, they're going to look at your transcripts. They're going to look at all your undergrad transcripts, and if you have any graduate transcripts, they're going to look at those as well. They're going to pay particular attention to your quantitative classes. So think calculus, econ, stats, accounting, if you have them. If you don't have quantitative classes and you have a low GMAT score, then you've got another little trick that you need to overcome because you need to demonstrate quantitative aptitude in some way. If you have scored well within your undergraduate and graduate transcripts, you're going to want to highlight this in the additional essay, which I'll get to in a couple slides. Also, another really good way to mitigate a lower GMAT score is to take an additional quantitative class. So take a math for management, take a stats. Calculus is almost a prerequisite for almost every MBA program. You want to take it and you want to get an A. There are many different ways to do that. You can do a local community college. You can go online. There's some great name online classes that I always have my clients take to help mitigate that lower score. So definitely want to try and show it in other ways than just the GMAT. Your recommenders can help you mitigate a lower GMAT score as well. So specifically, if you have a GMAT quant issue, you want to encourage your recommenders to highlight your analytical strengths on the recommendation, both in the actual written part of the recommendation as well as the ratings, because having that unbiased, so-called unbiased recommendation is important. If you have an issue with your GMAT verbal, you want to encourage your recommenders to focus on your communication abilities as well as your overall smarts. Again, just to help make sure that AdCom doesn't only look at the GMAT and they realize that you have strengths in other areas. Okay, this next slide is customize your resume. I am a huge believer in the resume, and in fact, we'll spend sometimes 10 different drafts with my own clients making sure that this resume speaks to all of your strengths as much as it can. I believe it's the most overlooked part of the application by applicants. This is a piece of information you can use to your advantage. For specific to low GMAT, you can highlight your analytical work experience here all the way through. You want to demonstrate that you're capable of understanding volumes of data, analysis, budgeting. Pull out any minor analytical experience you can. And some jobs it's very easy to do this, some it's not. But you really want to demonstrate on the resume that you have analytical prowess. Okay, I mentioned this a little bit before. Address the matter in an additional essay. Every single school, for the most part, has some kind of an additional essay space. It just varies on the length. HBS in particular has been very, very short the last few years with a character limit. The majority of schools will get you anywhere from 300 to 500 words. You don't want to make AdCom guess if you are not aware of the issue. You want to, in the essay, you want to state that you're aware that your GMAT is lower and it's not indicative of your abilities. And then you want to use your past academic and work experience as better support of your abilities and literally state that you will not have a problem handling the curriculum. Again, the GMAT is what they look at to ensure that you're able to thrive in their curriculum. And then my last slide is about for interview tips. And even in the interview, you want to highlight your intellectual strength wherever possible. So whether you're giving examples, whether you're talking about your work experience, highlight those analytical skills. You do not need to bring up your GMAT unless you're directly asked, or if there's a concern, or if you're asked that is there a concern you have on your application. Most interviews are blind, so the interviewer will not have access to your GMAT. However, if you are directly asked, respond in a similar way to what you've written in your additional essay. So talk about, it's a little lower than I would have liked. I took it twice, but here are the ways that I feel that are much better indicators of my ability, of my academic and my intellectual abilities. So from an admissions consultant perspective, those are the ways that we really would like you to highlight the rest of your skills and the rest of the portions of your background to make sure to mitigate somewhat of a lower GMAT score. And now I think I'm turning it back over to, who am I turning it over to?
For our Q&A, actually, we are. Very good. And we see here there's been a very active, there's been some very active activity here as far as people wanting to submit some questions. So we have our first one. And this, I think, will be for you, Karen. The question is, I've already retaken the GMAT 3 times. Are you sure schools will still be okay with me retaking it further? Or at some point, does it start to look bad? I've already taken the GMAT 3 times. Are you sure schools will still be okay with retaking it further? Or at some point, does it start to look bad?
At some point, you need to call a spade and be done. Absolutely. You should not be taking the GMAT for years on end. What I would do is I would really think about the way you're studying, and Jake, you might be able to piggyback on this one as well. And make sure that you have exhausted all different ways of studying. So if you are having a specific issue in a specific area, make sure that you are 100% confident that there is nothing more you can do to raise that score. If that's the case, then I would stop it at 3 times and then move on to the rest of your application.
Yeah, actually it's funny because students also ask me this question as well when in tutoring sessions. They ask me, Jake, how does it look? And of course I say, well, I'm not an admissions consultant, but I think it's probably fair to say that uh, if there has been improvement or if there's going to be significant or dramatic improvement, that's never a bad thing. It's never a bad thing. So, and let's see, so your score is good for 5 years and schools have access to your last 4 test administrations. I believe so. So, so there is a cutoff or a limit to how many times you can take it and actually have that score even visible to the school for your application. So, okay. Okay. Next question. This will probably be for me. The question is, how many points can I expect to improve from test to test? I have a month between tests. Okay. All right. So this is a very interesting question, and this is a question that I also get from tutoring students. Um, Basically, how can I expect to improve from test to test? I will say that you know your own performance and your own skill sets and ability better than I do. Okay. Our course is adapted. It keeps track of what you're good at, what you're not so good at, speeding up or slowing down accordingly. I am not in the prediction business. People ask me, Jake, what am I going to get? What do you think? What's going to happen? And of course, if I was in the prediction business, I probably wouldn't be a GMAT teacher. I would probably be doing something else if I could predict numbers that would come true. So um, I think that, but back to the point about expectations, that's why in my earlier point, I talked about the importance of taking practice tests, reviewing practice tests, and really pushing yourself and seeing, well, what might you get in a test environment, and translate that to what might you get in a real life testing environment. There's always a variance, probably within 30 points of that. If you have a month between tests, there's also the variable factors of, well, how much time are you going to have? Will you have 8 hours a day to study? Will you have only 1 hour a day to study? So, there might be some other factors which uh, might come into play and might affect your ability to practice and review and hopefully see some improvement. So, on average, I believe for our students in the Economist GMAT tutor course, on average, students see an 80 point increase, which is quite significant. So I think that's some good news. All right, moving right along, we have a third question. This is for Karen. Oh, this is a great one. Wow. Karen, let's see. How do schools view MOOC quant courses like Coursera as proof of a quant course? How do schools view MOOC quant courses like Coursera as proof of a quant course? Fantastic question.
Very good question. You know, the the jury's out, to be honest. Coursera is very, very new. It has not been proven, and so I'll be honest, I do not recommend those kinds of classes to my clients in order to specifically mitigate low GMATs or even low GPAs. I would much rather see you take it from, ideally a brick and mortar school. So whether it's, a UCLA, UCLA Online has a great program, Hawks does. There's many programs out there that actually do it. I would be a little bit careful. Again, you're looking at mitigation here, and I would be careful about using something that's unproven at this point. 5 years from now, I might have a different answer, but you don't want to take something and then have there be questions over, well, is the actual class you took, is that even a strong enough class to help mitigate? You want them to say, hey, you know what, you took calculus from XYZ University, great.
That's a good point, Karen, and I'll just piggyback on that. When I started teaching, like I said, 11 years ago, so it wasn't quite the Stone Age, but I did have students who were concerned about their quant academic background, and so they thought, well, maybe should I go to a community college? Should I take a class here or there, even just online, just to show the admissions committee that I have the quant chops? And I actually didn't have too many students that did that. And the few students that did do that, they didn't do it so much for, just for the application process, but they did it for their own edification. They just wanted to see, well, gee, can I really handle an online quant course? Can I handle this? Like, if this is what I will be doing online before I get into business school, what's real business school going to be like? So, if you want to do that, my suggestion would be probably do it for your own, I guess, learning purposes, but probably I wouldn't bet the farm thinking that that's going to dramatically improve an application. Okay. All right, we got another one. Wow, fascinating. Coming in fast and furious. I was going through a rough time personally when I took the GMAT. Got a low score, and I don't have time to retake the GMAT. Should I tell this to the admissions committee? I was going through a rough time personally when I took the GMAT, got a low score, and I don't have time to retake the GMAT. Should I tell this to the admissions committee? Karen, what do you think about that?
You know, no. And I'm usually a big fan of being pretty honest, because I think it brings up too many other questions, um, in terms of you don't necessarily want to let them know that you're having a personal problem because honestly, if you're not ready to, if you don't have enough time to retake it, and here we are in January, so you actually have a ton of time to take it to get into round one, then I would say wait until the next year. Um, to me, personal problems are not a mitigating issue for the GMAT. Personal problems, on the other hand, are definitely explainable for a low grade. If you're explaining low grades in your transcript, then absolutely. We have a dog barking. um, but but personal, I would not bring that up as a reason because it sounds like an excuse. I would do your best to retake it, and especially now, given the timing.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. Okay, we have another one in the audience. Okay. This one is probably a little specific, but I think we can probably maybe make this a little general. The question is, I took the GMAT twice and earned around a 550 on the quant section each time. You probably mean 550 total. I think it's just on the quant section. It's been a few years since attempting the exam, and I've since worked in accounts receivable for a large US asset management and accounting firm. Will this work experience help supplement a low quant score? Okay, so let's see. GMAT twice, earned a 550, worked in accounts receivable in an asset management accounting firm. Will this work experience supplement a low quant score? Karen, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. You know, it really depends what school you're looking at. Schools don't have bottom and top numbers, but a 550 is low enough that it's going to keep you out of a certain select number of schools. Um, any analytical experience would absolutely help mitigate, and that again, that's something that you would want to talk about in the additional essay. That whereas my GMAT score, um, it's not is not as strong as I would like. I'd like to tell you about my strength in analytical. And so it's not only about working in accounts receivable, but it's very specific to what have you done to demonstrate that analytical prowess. Um, so I would certainly use it, but then you also want to look at the overall and look at it relative to the schools where you're applying, because a school like HBS is going to look at a 550 much differently than a school like um, UCLA or Emory, for example.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Karen. All right, we have another question. Okay, I think this one's probably more for me. The question reads, I have 2 weeks until my GMAT retake date, and this is pretty much my last chance to improve my quant score. What are some easy, fast ways to improve my quant in such a small amount of time? Okay. Well, 2 weeks until your retake date. Okay. Um, well, we far beyond the scope of this call to just talk about easy tips and tricks. I mean, we can't really talk about that here. There's probably not enough time. I also don't have any context as to where you're scoring. You said it's your last chance to improve your quant score, so I don't know how many times you taken the GMAT already. I don't know what your previous scores are. I don't know what your goal score is or dream score is. I don't know where you're headed. So I really don't have any context or framework as to what the specific situation is. But what I would say is if you do have 2 weeks to take before you're taking the test again, I would probably go back through all of or as many of your past practice tests as possible, probably reviewing all of the questions, both questions you got correct and questions you got incorrect, and trying to see those traps. Is there's certain keywords, or there's certain language, or there's certain conditions in those questions, certain questions that you keep missing. Are there, if you're trying to do picking numbers, plugging in, are there numbers you're not picking? Are there things that you're missing? Okay, so you're probably trying to sort of capture as many of those sort of gotchas as you can. That's what I would suggest doing in the next 2 weeks. I would also suggest taking one more, maybe even two more, but at least one more practice exam in the next 2 weeks. Again, that's probably the best advice I can give you. I don't know how many times you've taken the test, what those scores were, what your dream score, goal score is. So that's probably the best advice I can give. And okay, we have another question. This is probably for Karen. I have a very formal relationship with my recommenders. How can I steer them toward highlighting academic strengths not demonstrated by my GMAT score without crossing the line into being unprofessional? Oh, that's very well worded. Oh, whoever wrote that, fantastic. Hats off to you. I have a very formal relationship with my recommenders. How can I steer them toward highlighting academic strengths not demonstrated by my GMAT score without crossing a line into being unprofessional? Well done.
So one of the things that I always do with my clients, and we do with Stacy Blackman, is we put together recommender packages, which basically is it's a several-page document that highlights your strengths to your recommenders. So you're not crossing the line in terms of telling them what to write, but you're reminding them. And some of your recommenders are not going to be able to recall off the top of their head how you've demonstrated your leadership. They're not going to be able to recall off the top of your head how you've demonstrated your analytical skills. And so in putting together a document that combined with the resume where it talks about, hey, thanks so much for helping me or for agreeing to serve as a recommender. Here are the schools I'm applying to. Here are my deadlines. These are the topic areas that I'm focusing on in my application. And you might have 5 different attributes. One is usually going to be leadership. One's going to be intellectual ability. One should be your ability to work with other people, so teamwork, communications, etc. Um, so in using that strategy, it's coming up with a positioning strategy for yourself, which is what we do with our clients. Then under each of those headings, you can put specific bullet points about how you've demonstrated. So if you don't want to necessarily let your recommender know that you have a low GMAT, you might just want to talk about it'd be really great if you could highlight my analytical abilities and put down a specific project or two where you really were able to outshine everyone else, or somewhere where you were very clearly able to demonstrate strength in this area. So that's how we work with our clients, and how I work with my clients in particular to help make sure their recommenders are talking about the right things. And usually the recommenders I've never had a recommender who hasn't wanted to even look at this because it helps them because they can't remember everything, especially if maybe they worked with you 3 years ago. Recommendations are a little bit of a burden for your recommender, and so giving them as much help up front, it's not crossing a line at all. Crossing the line is writing it for them. But by giving them examples of, hey, let me tell you how I've demonstrated some of these traits that I'd like you to highlight, that's completely fair game.
That's very good, Karen. Actually, you know what, Karen? I I have a question for you. Actually, it's a question yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'm sure an audience member probably thought about this. It's a question I have for you because I've had students ask me this question, and I actually had to say I don't know. But how do you handle that? And I'm sure you and others you work with, like, this is probably get this a lot. How do you handle the very delicate situation of asking for recommendations from your current bosses or supervisors, um, where basically you have to reveal that your intentions to eventually leave the company and get an MBA? So, how do you handle that very sensitive, delicate situation?
It's very tricky, and honestly, it each I always tell my clients it's up to you to get a good understanding of where you are in your company and if that's going to be an issue for you. And with a lot of fields where they get year-end bonuses in December, and if you're applying, well, actually round one or round two, because you want your round two recommendations to be done anyways by then. It's tricky, and so there are some who have good relationships and they've been talking about their MBA, and there are some fields, investment banking, for example, where you're known to be 2 or 3 years. It's kind of up and out, and then you go back and get your MBA. But there are some where it would be a real hardship, and they might let you go. They might not give you new projects, etc. So first and foremost, it's up to you as the applicant to assess that because it's difficult for me as a consultant or anyone to understand that. If you think, though, that it is going to be a clear risk for your career, you don't use your current boss. And there's a spot to write about that sometimes in the additional essay, sometimes specifically schools in the application itself will say, why are you using these recommenders, or please comment on your choice of recommenders. And so you just can very clearly state in a sentence, and it's no problem. I am not using my current boss because I'm worried about XYZ. In place, I am using, so maybe it's a prior boss from the same company that would be okay, or maybe it's a boss from a different company. Ideally, if you've worked for several companies or firms, I like getting one person from each anyways, as long as that second one hasn't been, more than 5 years ago. But that's how you handle it. So if it's going to be an issue for your career and your job, you don't use that person, and
Thank
then
you.
you
I
just
appreciate
explain it.
that because I've gotten that question a few times, and yeah, you're right. It's very tricky. People are very vulnerable, right? It's like not in an ideal world, every company would want their employees to have graduate degrees and further their education and go out into the world, and but that's not always the case. So, very, very well said. Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on, and we probably have about 10 more minutes to answer some questions during the Q&A portion of this webinar. So if you have submitted a question and we have not, or we will not have a chance to respond during today's session, we can respond after today's session via email. So we can certainly follow up with you. And thank you for everyone's being so vigorous with their submitting questions. Okay. Next question. To what extent is the quant section deemed more relevant than the verbal? To what extent is the quant section deemed more relevant than the verbal? I just want to mention, I just want to address this real quick, and then Karen, if you want to take it over for me. So when they say relevant, I guess the person who asked this question is asking whether it's more important, like whether your quant raw score is more important than your verbal raw score. And Karen, you can probably address that. But I just want to discuss just from the scoring perspective, something that a lot of students may not be aware of is that your overall 200 to 800 scale score is actually weighted in favor of your verbal. That's just the way it is. And it's been like that for many, many years. And reasons why that is, we won't get into today, but that's why when there's a lot of people who are often shocked that they will get a really great GMAT score, 720, 710, something like that, and their verbal was outstanding and their quant wasn't that outstanding. Wasn't. Yet they were still got this magic number. So I guess the person who asked this question is really asking as far as relevancy, like whether that's important for admission. So Karen, if you want to weigh in on that, I think that would probably be helpful.
Yeah, it's both. Both are important. And for those exact reasons. The verbal score is important because it's what pulls up your overall score, and the overall score is important. But the quant score is important because that's really what determines your ability to handle the curriculum, and that's what they're looking at. And so the quant score actually, the threshold has declined over the last several years, I think, especially as we have so many people worldwide who have driven that quant score up. That, back when I started for top business schools, it was 80% plus was kind of considered the threshold that no one really spoke of. But now it's down more into the set. I like to aim, again, this is for a top program, for a quant score kind of 70% plus. Now, have I had clients who have gotten into top programs with lower than that? Of course I have. But it's really both. It's the same kind of thing when someone says, "Hey, if I get a 760 GMAT, is that going to get me into a school?" Absolutely not. I turned down a number of candidates with 760 GMATs when I was an admissions officer at Kellogg because every piece of your application needs to be working, and so it's everything together. So unfortunately, you need to study verbal and quant.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, 760 and not even getting into Kellogg. Wow. Brutal. Brutal. Oh wow. What have we come to? All right. Well, I guess that's life in the big city, as they say. So thank you for that, Karen. Um, okay, here's another one. I think this is probably a lot of people wanted to ask this question. Will a high GMAT score make up for a lower than average GPA when applying for schools? Will a high GMAT score make up for a lower than average GPA when applying for schools?
It'll help. It'll definitely help. Again, though, you're going to want to explain in an additional essay why you have a lower than average GPA. It also depends where those classes are, and so a C in calculus is much more damaging than a C in field hockey. So it really depends, and that's why AdCom goes through those transcripts pretty carefully. But yes, just as I said, writing additional essay, you can do the same thing for a GMAT. My undergraduate grades are not indicative of my ability to handle the curriculum. Here's what happened when I was an undergrad. Own up to why your grades were lower. You could have a family issue. You could literally just not have taken school seriously. Tell them that. They would much rather have you be honest than to make up some random convoluted excuse. And then again, like I said with the GMAT, then go through the same, here's what is more indicative. My 760 GMAT score, my, amazing work experience where I've done XYZ. Uh, put that in the additional essay. But yes, a higher GMAT score can help compensate for a lower GPA. Ideally, one of the two is going to be, within their range, if not both.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. I'm sure that's a question a lot of people have about that sort of balance between the GMAT score and the GPA. Okay. All right, here's another question. I'll take this one for myself. This is GMAT prep related. How many practice exams do you recommend to take before your second official test, or even the first? How many practice exams do you recommend to take before your second official test, or even the first? Okay, I'll just answer this real quick. So, I will say that when people ask me, "Hey Jake, how do I know when I'm ready to take the real GMAT? How do I know when I'm ready?" My response to that is, I guess our response to that is, as the group of tutors for the Economist GMAT tutor program is, when you'll hit your dream score at least twice in practice tests. When you'll hit your dream score at least twice in practice tests. The reason why we say that is you want to have confidence. The testing on test day, the testing environment, the testing center, the whole hysteria and anxiety of GMAT test day, there's enough going on that day. Wouldn't it be great to have just a lot less anxiety by walking on test day, walking into the testing center, knowing that you've already delivered the goods? You know you've already got your 740, 750, whatever it is, 700, 650, whatever you need, whatever your dream score is. Wouldn't it be great to know that you've already delivered that at home or in the privacy of your own home and privacy of your own office? So now you're just transferring that experience to the testing center on test day. So that's my recommendation. Now, if that's just getting your dream score twice on practice tests, I don't know how many practice tests total you would need to do in order to get that. Right? Um, I will say that burnout is also real. That's something that once I joined the Economist GMAT tutor program 2 years ago from Kaplan, that's where I was for 9 years. I have seen a lot of burnout where people are just taking test after test after test after test. They're burning themselves out, Some people actually say that they've just taken so many practice tests by the time they walked into the testing center and sat faced the computer screen, they were just fried, they were just done. And we want to avoid burnout as well. So you know yourself better than anyone. So you want to gauge. Remember, studying is important, but taking practice tests to gauge your success is also important. But don't overdo it. Okay. Last question. I think we just have a few minutes here. What if I have submitted my GMAT scores to the schools already? I scored a 660. Do you recommend taking the GRE thereafter to mitigate my score? Wow. Submitted my GMAT to the schools already, 660. Do you recommend taking the GRE to mitigate my score? I have a lot to say about this, but I think I will turn this over to Karen first so that she can have her opinion on this.
Uh, I don't know. Can I comment on the GRE to a GMAT tutor? I'm not sure.
Please, by all means.
So here's the
By
thing
all
with the
means, I have
GRE.
my own opinions about the GRE, and I've actually
Schools,
taught GRE myself, so I have a lot to say. Go on.
okay. So the GRE is fairly new within the past 3 to 4 years that business schools are taking it, and there's a lot of mixed emotions I think around it. There are some who say absolutely not. You should only take the GMAT because it signals that you're serious about business school. I personally do not believe that that's the case. The GRE and the GMAT are two very different tests, and in particular for those people who have difficulty with quant, I think the GRE is sometimes it's a better scoring test. And so if I have clients who can't get over a certain threshold with the GMAT, I say, hey, let's take the GRE just to see. Business schools have stated that they look at them the same, and I tend to believe them. Not everyone believes them, but I do. And I have had clients who have had a lot of success with the GRE, especially those who have had a lower GMAT. The fact that you've already taken and submitted a GMAT to a school, I also don't think that that's an issue with taking the GRE because look, from the school's perspective, they just want to understand that you can handle their curriculum. And whatever way you can prove that, whether it's the GMAT or the GRE, that's what's most important. Schools also report on the GMAT scores, and the issue with the low GMAT scores is that tends to bring down their average, and they like to be able to tout a strong average. So if you have a low GMAT, I mean, I had a client with I think a 590, and she ended up taking the GRE, and she got in a booth with the GRE and a 590 GMAT because I think the school could actually comment on the GRE and use that as her official score. So I'm a big fan of taking both. The one caveat that I will say is that if you come from a background that is very, very light on quant, both in undergrad and as well as work experience, taking the GRE may not serve you as well because it's just more difficult to evaluate your quantitative aptitude. And so being able to take the more standardized GMAT, if your background is, let's say you're a liberal arts major who doesn't have any quant in undergrad and currently you're a writer, um, you really want to show business school that you can handle the curriculum, and the GMAT might be a little bit of a better indicator to do that. That said, business schools are taking the GRE because they want to broaden out their applicant pool. So I'm a fan of both.
Okay. Good. You're a fan of both. I am a fan of both too. Real quick, I have a lot to say about the GRE, but I know we'll have to close very shortly. I will say this though, because a lot of students have also asked me this when they're trying to beat the clock, the GMAT score is not moving up, and they say, okay, well, Jake, maybe I should just um, I'm going to take the GRE instead. Now, these are people who have not yet applied. They just know that they're not delivering the best GMAT score. They're not going to deliver the best GMAT score, so they figure they're going to run into the open arms of the GRE, and the GRE score is now going to be their savior. Okay, and I tell people that don't think the GRE is is necessarily going to be the savior. The GRE changed a few years ago, and the quant is no longer the walk in the park it once was on the GRE. The GRE math quant is not as difficult as the GMAT quant, but it is harder than people think. I just want to say that. All right, it's not quite as easy. And the verbal on the GRE, wow, get ready for memorizing those 500 SAT words that you thought you didn't have to use anymore after high school. And now there's even more of them. So the GRE, I wouldn't say it's an easy transfer. It's maybe a little easier, but not that easy. I just want to say that. So. All right. Okay, so wow, we're actually at a little bit over past our time. So uh, I want to thank Karen and everyone for being here, but I'm now going to turn this call over to Adam Ingerman, who is the head of this program, and he's going to give you some very important information. And thank you for listening to us today. Adam?
Yes, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Karen. That was very interesting conversation. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We'll be hosting future webinars over the next few months covering topics, GMAT, GRE, MBA admissions. So look out for invitations from us and please join. Follow the Economist Test Prep on Facebook and Twitter to get exclusive offers and invitations. You can sign up for a free trial of the GMAT Tutor. You can actually sign up for a free trial of the GRE Tutor as well, also from The Economist. After this webinar, we'll be sending all attendees a 15% promo discount for both the GRE and the GMAT Tutor, so you should try them both out. The last thing I'll say is we've recorded today's presentation and we will post it on GMAT and GRE Tutor blogs if you want to watch it again or forward to your friends. But that's it for today. This was great. And I look forward to joining future webinars. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.